Sarah, thank you so much for that kind introduction. And I think it's always best to begin these presentations with thanks. So allow me to take this opportunity to express my thanks to the organizers, to Estelle, Maureen, and Sarah, and the rest of the organizing committee for making this event possible. It's been such an inspiring day and a half, and how I wish we could have had this conversation for much longer in person. The summit has been equally informative as it has been impressive to hear from you, the youth, on your views on nuclear disarmament, and all of these messages have been nothing short of inspiring. How so early into your lives, into your studies and careers, already you're not only engaging in disarmament discourse, but in advancing the advocacy. In this way, I would like to think that I'm not the only human rights officer here. I think all of us are, one way or another, human rights advocates as well. Now, over the past day and a half rather, much has been said about the need to prevent and for the prohibition of nuclear weapons. But as we've heard earlier, and I recall Seth had highlighted this in his presentation earlier as well, is how the impacts of nuclear is not some far distant hypothetical, but in fact it is a reality that we've seen on various times in various places throughout history. And this leads me to the central concept of my role with the United Nations, and that is on the issue of accountability. We've discussed how nuclear use and nuclear weapons testing is perhaps maybe described as, has been described rather as wrong, how it should never be seen again, and how it is a grave injustice. But the question I'd like to pose to you now is, in the face of injustice, how should justice be perceived? How can justice be pursued? And these questions lie central to my mandate, addressing the Marshall Islands nuclear legacy. Now, if I could get a raise of hands, who here has heard of the nuclear legacy in the Marshall Islands? That's impressive. That's an incredibly impressive number. And I'm happy to share with you that you are a rare breed, because one of the first human rights impacts that we've identified in the nuclear legacy in RMI, you'll be hearing me say these three letters often, the Republic of the Marshall Islands, is with regard to access to information or the lack thereof. So the fact that at your young age, you are already familiar or have some level of familiarity with the RMI nuclear legacy goes to show how far along you already are, especially vis-a-vis the general public. So what we're seeing here is a photo from one of the nuclear tests conducted off Bikini Atoll. And for those who might be less familiar, allow me to give you the numbers of exactly how devastating these tests were. Now, what the nuclear legacy involves are 67 known nuclear tests. And we include and put emphasis on the word known, because again, there is a question as to the completeness of the information out there. And while 67 is in and of itself a big number, the magnitude of these impacts are all the more emphasized by the size of these experiments. And what we have seen is, from the record, the total explosive and combined explosive power of these 67 nuclear tests is equivalent to over 108 million tons of dynamite. That's approximately 7,232 times of explosive power that was released in RMI. And as one may imagine, this would involve not only historical exposures, but ongoing impacts that continue to this day. And that's what led to the creation of the resolution that I'm presenting to you on screen. This is HRC Resolution 5135, which was adopted in 2022 by the Human Rights Council. And what they do there is request my office to do three things. The first is found in paragraph 11, to provide technical assistance and capacity building to the National Nuclear Commission of the Marshall Islands. And the second and third are related to a report. And this report is my main responsibility with OHCHR. We are preparing a report on addressing the challenges and barriers to human rights stemming from the nuclear legacy. And as we can see in paragraph 13, in the preparation of this report, I am mandated to seek the views of the government, of civil society, of Marshallese stakeholders writ large. Now, in the implementation of this mandate, the framework that we use is referred to as the Transitional Justice Framework. Is this a term, is this a framework that's familiar to you? Can I get another raise of hands? Who here is familiar with the term transitional justice? Okay, great. Perhaps a less number, but I can see some familiarity. And what we see here is a brief summary of what TJ is. Truth, accountability, reparations, and guarantees of non-repetition. These are the elements of transitional justice. But how I would prefer to summarize what TJ seeks to achieve is a presentation of justice beyond the quintessential form of a courtroom process. I'm sure when we would race through the memories in our minds and we would try to think, okay, what do lawyers do? How is justice pursued? More often than not, that form, the form that we probably grew up to watching on Suits on Netflix, would show you Harvey Specter in a suit arguing before a judge. But what transitional justice emphasizes for us is that justice can definitely be pursued through a courtroom process. That is a part of it, but it isn't all of it. And there is justice through truth, through accountability, through reparations, and through guarantees of non-repetition. That is, the institutional changes necessary to ensure that the violent scene in the RMI nuclear legacy is never again conducted, and of course the impacts that continue are mitigated. Let me emphasize here that truth refers to not only truth-telling but truth-seeking. So this involves providing not only access to information on the facts, but the identification of the gaps that are in need of filling. Under reparations, we would often conceive that, and it's often presented with a dollar figure, but compensation, as you can see, is just one of varied forms that reparation takes. There's also restitution to restore the original conditions to the extent possible, rehabilitation, which refers not only to the environment, but also to one's health, for example, and last but not least, satisfaction. And when we speak of satisfaction as a form of reparation, what this refers to is most often captured by an apology. And oftentimes that is something overlooked. I remember growing up, when I was, as a child, the role of apology seemed to be something personal. It seemed to be something that was so perhaps easily given at times. And I remember when I first encountered the TJ framework, how I realized that an apology plays a much larger role in human rights and remediation. So in the implementation of the mandate, it is very important that we prepare this report as something beyond a keyboard process. I'm not staying in my office in Geneva writing this from my swivel chair. Rather, we are preparing a report which does not impose a concept of justice for the Marshallese people to implement. Rather, it is a report that communicates Marshallese views on justice. And my role is not to beat my chest and say, hey, this is what I think justice should be. Rather, it is simply to amplify Marshallese voices, amplify that message through the language of law. So these are several stakeholder engagements that we've conducted over the past 3 years and running. Over here on the bottom right corner is March 1st of 2024, and March 1st in RMI is their Memorialization Day, that is Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day. Now, through the course of these consultations, we identified several human rights concerns. And what we see here is just a summary. There are several other ways of unpacking how human rights and the environment continues to be impacted in RMI, but we're highlighting a choice few. One would be, the first is forced displacement, and this should be read not only in light of one's human right to adequate housing, but in light of Marshallese culture as well, that emphasizes the role of land rights in their indigenous practice and traditions. We've already touched on access to information and how this feeds into and comes hand in hand with the issues on education, considering that the lack of information has not been resolved because what we've collected over time through these testimonies is how the very textbooks that they use in schools are well donated by the US. And the nuclear legacy isn't quite discussed in any way extensively. Now, allow me to go through this a bit faster and draw your attention to the 9 o'clock block there, which references climate change. And this is something that we'll be touching on a bit in further detail after a few slides, because we have often referenced how both nuclear and climate change are existential crises that are in need of addressing. But one thing that we've seen quite clearly in the context of RMI is how they're not only important, they also intersect. So I touched on this earlier, on how the information gap is a major human rights issue that we needed to address. And it is for that reason that the report that we prepared had focused on the element of truth. Of all the elements of transitional justice, we had dedicated this report to truth for both a reason of relevance, but also a reason of strategy. Not only is it an element of transitional justice, but the thing was, we came to the quick realization that should we have discussed any other element, may it have been accountability, reparations, or memorialization, it would simply loop back to another question, the memorialization of what? And that is because truth is a precondition as well to many mechanisms and efforts in pursuing justice. I've provided for you here a QR code in case you would like to access this, but I'll be putting this up again later in the slides. Now, the report it consists of 5 parts, and what we do in the introduction is explain our approach. Now, the role of documentary evidence, that is evidence on written paper, has more often been emphasized over oral tradition. Now, that has posed a problem for us in the preparation of the report, considering that Marshallese culture identifies oral tradition as the main mode of knowledge transfer. So what we made sure to do was to emphasize the role of what's called buebuenato, that is storytelling, in the collection of, in this study. And the reason why that's so important is in light of this ethics protocol and the concepts captured therein, drafted, created by the RMI, National Nuclear Commission. And the gist of this emphasizes that it is not enough for us, for anyone, to come to the Marshall Islands with good intentions. We need to implement this mandate in a way that is respectful of Marshallese traditions and cultures, in a way that is meaningful to the Marshallese. And that is why we made it a point to conduct our consultations as part of the Marshallese process of buebuenato, that is storytelling. The reason why we also needed to rely on buebuenato is because this here on screen are 2 images of declassified documents with regard to the RMI nuclear legacy, declassified under the Clinton administration. Does that tell us much? No. In fact, this image on the right, you can barely see it, but that is in fact one of the declassified documents that is simply ineligible, non-legible rather. So it is for this reason that we needed to sift through the entirety of the records and twin them with what we've heard from oral testimony as well. And from these records, we were able to identify hard facts. Did the oral tradition align on all fours with the documented evidence? Rarely. It would happen at times. But what did happen is a presentation of enough facts that told us that there is a truth to this and that it is worth looking into more. And what we were able to identify in the report is, of course, the establishment of what was called the Pacific Proving Ground, how nuclear tests were conducted by the US government prior to as well as during a UN established trusteeship, rehabilitative efforts that were conducted, albeit incomplete, as well as negotiations that have been conducted between the Marshall Islands and the US. And last but not least, and I want to emphasize how important this is emphasizing the role of the Marshalls as champions for justice. So often we look at situations where there are human rights impacts, human rights atrocities, and we present those impacted in single form as victims. But it is so important to emphasize here how the Marshallese have not only been impacted by the nuclear legacy, they are likewise the champions for addressing it. Now, these are several human rights impacts that we have identified, impacts on life and health, impacts on a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. I myself am a member of the Environment and Climate Change team of OHCHR, which communicates how we're approaching this report, which communicates how the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment plays a central role in our analysis. So now I'm going to skip over here. So earlier I had mentioned that there is a nuclear legacy and climate change nexus. And I invite you to scan this QR code because it is quite surprising how this nexus is open access. It's something that you can see on your Google Maps. And what you'll see when you access this link is a geomarker on Google Maps, which brings you to what has been flagged on maps as the nuclear sarcophagus, or what has otherwise been referred to as, the Runit Dome. And what this presents is a concrete structure constructed by the US in the 1980s, which was meant to house irradiated topsoil. However, what we found through our investigation was that while there may be a cement roof and there may be cement walls, there was no cement flooring. And any topsoil that was dumped into this crater was dumped onto porous sand. And the reports, not only from the UN, but from the Department of Energy of the US, has confirmed that the contents of this dome remain in communication with the groundwater, which therefore stands to irradiate water in the open sea as well as in the lagoon. This is an example of the intersection between the nuclear legacy and climate change. Considering that the Marshall Islands is a small island developing state especially, they are particularly vulnerable to rising tides. And when we look at this image, we see that these rising tides do not only involve the threat of inundation, but the threat of carrying irradiated waters to inhabited lands. So in this report, we were able to apply the transitional justice framework, and we've put a focus on the element of truth. What we wanted to do was not only highlight the gaps, but highlight the facts as well as the gaps, and call for potential mechanisms. like any UN report, we ended the report with a list of conclusions and recommendations. By their nature, these are non-binding. However, they are authoritative in the sense that they are the findings of a secretariat agency office within the United Nations. And what we did was, first of all, confirm, as you can see in paragraph 71, that the nuclear legacy is not just some chapter in history, but a continuing reality for the Marshallese people. And then we continue to list down recommendations addressed not only to the US, but to the Marshall Islands, as well as to the United Nations, the international community writ large. Now, with the presentation of this report, the mandate was renewed by the Human Rights Council, and it has asked us to continue this mandate and has asked for another report. But this time, as you can see under paragraph 5, it has included a new enumeration, one that wasn't there before. And it specifically asks us to engage with the Marshallese diaspora, indigenous peoples, and youth representatives. It has asked us to engage with all of you here. And here are some examples of those engagements. These are some engagements we've had in the US, in Guam. This with the youth engagements earlier this month in Majuro and Kwajalein atolls. So what we've done is publish a call. And what we're doing now is undergoing a phase in the report preparations where we're inviting youth leadership, youth representatives, such as all of you here, to engage with us, to make input, whether in the form of student essays, poetry, artwork, any media, whichever you're comfortable with, to share it with OHCHR, and we would receive this. We will rely on your input in the preparation of the report, and if you do give us authorization to do so, we would also publish your input on the UN platform, which I think is quite the opportunity for you as well. You'll see through that link that we have a call for input, and as you can see here, the next report focuses on justice. We have provided several prompts on how perhaps justice can be addressed, but these are simply guide questions. They're not questions of an exam that all need to be answered. They're simply ways that we could probably approach the larger issue of accountability. So I do invite for your engagement, for your participation in this process. You know, I myself, I mentioned I'm Filipino, and that means that I came from a culture which, when growing up, I was often told to sit down and listen rather than to speak up. And that is something that we are deliberately avoiding in this process. We want to hear from you, and not only how youth are impacted by nuclear legacies, but also how the youth view accountability and justice. And I feel at times that is not given enough attention. I think it's great that we've emphasized that and have recognized that the youth do have specific impacts and vulnerabilities when it comes to nuclear. But I think your voice, when it comes to the resolution of these issues, how justice can be pursued, is equally important. It would be therefore a pleasure to hear from all of you as contributors for the next report, and perhaps this would be the first of many engagements that may lead not only to a relationship of a contributor, but I'm sure down the road, perhaps many and all of you, I would be calling colleagues within my office as well. So as mentioned, this next report will emphasize youth voices, and I'm happy to share with you that we have among us today the fortune of the presence of a Marshallese youth. And she has agreed generously to speak from the floor, to tell us about her work. And with that said, let us all put our hands together for Kayce Malachi.
it short. Hello, guys, and Yahweh, everyone. First of all, I want to thank. Oh my goodness, I'm so nervous. Sorry, guys, but I want to give thanks to the organizers of this event, and it's such a great opportunity to be standing in front of you all, to be here up and talk about such a sensitive topic. My name is Kayce Malachi. I'm a first-gen second year at UW, which is called the University of Washington in Seattle, Washington. Go Dogs! And I'm majoring in medical anthropology and public health, global health. And my family's from the Marshall Islands, as Raphael said. And as many of y'all know, it's based in the Pacific Ocean, and the community out there has been very affected by nuclear testings. I'm Foromajo, but I'm mixed with a bit of Kiribati, Japanese, and German. Growing up in the diaspora, I never learned or knew much about nuclear testings until only when it would only be brought up when joking around with my siblings or cousins or friends. Like, we would joke around and say, "Oh, that's why your island got bombed." And I didn't really think about it that much until now. But thinking about it now, I feel like it was a coping mechanism for most of us, because it's such a sensitive topic to talk about in our communities. And the Marshall Islands serve as a nuclear testing ground for the United States from 1946 to 1958, conducting 67 tests as a legacy of the Cold War. The detonation of the bomb is equivalent to 7,000 times the Hiroshima bomb. This resulted in long-term health issues and environmental contamination, ranging from 100 to 1,000 people dying from the nuclear testings. A lot of these numbers were infants and newborns. These statistics led to significant cultural traditions we do today, which are called gamems. And gamems are basically a traditional Marshallese first birthday that celebrates the milestone of a child that just turned 1, symbolizing life and survival. This became very important after the US nuclear testing in Marshall Islands, which caused health problems, displacement, and radiation exposure. Celebrating an important step to life in the times of nuclear testings and after represents resilience, cultural identity, and hope for future generations, despite the devastating effects of the bombs. I grew up going to gamems and never thought of gamems being a powerful movement that is impacted by tragic events, which has led me to being interested in the health aspects in the nuclear legacy, since so many people were colonized and affected by US nuclear testings. I have witnessed relatives and community members suffer from illnesses inherited by radiation exposure from their family members in the past, or even having to adapt to other food sources because their foods have been contaminated by radiation. This motivates me to work even harder for my community, because as a person living in diaspora, I could do so much more effort and support in helping my village and community. I'm surrounded by nuclear legacy talks basically every day at the university I go to. I'm an intern for the NNC, which is the National Nuclear Commission in Marshall Islands, but I interned for them at the university I go to and started my first year and still continue to work with them. The purpose of the NNC is to develop a national strategy for nuclear justice. During my first year, me and Nick and Lemamo, my other colleagues, did an outreach to mines in Nick's old high school and did a presentation about SpongeBob and how it's literally a cartoon that's based on the events that happened at Bikini Atoll. The students didn't know much about it, which made them very interested in the topic and wanted to know more about it. 2 girls specifically, named Lucy Jacobs and Junia Kimura, wanted to get more involved, so we brought it up to one of our leaders Harley Barker, a professor at UW that advocates for the islanders or the Marshallese community, and she says she'll definitely mention it to the NNC, and they approved. This is where my next project begins, where I'll be connecting all Marshallese college students, starting with Eastern Washington, based at Spokane, Washington, to start to talk about nuclear legacy and building off there to start a conversation to the new generation. I also work for the Burke Museum, and my job is to learn more about the nuclear legacy and do the project that I just mentioned, where I connect students for nuclear justice with the Marshallese Weekly Research Cohort. I'm reading a book for work, and it's called Consequential Damages of Nuclear War by Barbara Rose Johnson and Holly Barker. And Nick's summarization of this book is, our goal as the NNC focuses on striking a balance between ensuring transparency in our work and advocating for justice on the Marshall Islands through ongoing efforts, meaningful work, and shared stories. The work was written as a part of an ongoing effort or evidence to share what the people of the Marshall Islands went through. That's where justice comes in within the term nuclear justice. We want to bring justice, whether that's environmental, health, or etc. We want to be an ongoing advocate for our people, and that's the purpose of the book. The book showcases stories of our people and what they went through. These are proven stories that we want to be able to continue to share for the generations to help our people get justice and also make sure our people or anyone knows the impact of nuclear testing. The book covers the hardships and challenges that the community has faced. And as our goal as the new generation is to continue their work and legacy. Another project that I should be working on soon is comparing RMI fishes before and after the nuclear testings. And also I think this spring we should be getting present fishes from the Marshall Islands and continue the work of Kalina Debrum, who was a PhD student at University of Washington, who just passed away just recently. I'm also involved with the registered student organization called SNJ, which stands for Student of Nuclear Justice. The purpose of the club is to invite students of all levels of knowledge to learn about the history of nuclear events, how different communities are affected by nuclear radiation, and how students can become involved with various projects and organizations working towards achieving nuclear justice. Examples of projects could include archival research in the UW Special Collections with the goal of raising awareness and expanding the use factor of archival documents for the pursuit of nuclear justice. The creation of special exhibits in the Burke Museum related to nuclear justice and nuclear history, creating infographics or other visuals assisting scientific organizations with their larger projects, or conducting or assisting with the research projects and more. Outside research projects, we aim to create an environment for collaboration between UW students, people, and organization within the broader realm of nuclear justice. The University of Washington has given me so many opportunities that I wouldn't have thought of getting. The university has also given me the opportunity to take a course that focused on nuclear colonization and decolonization, which this class made me open my eyes on seeing that not only did Marshallese people get deeply impacted by the bombs, but many other communities did. I'm so blessed to be a part of this cause that fights for the greater good, because if it doesn't start with us, there won't be any outcomes or improvements that will be seen. Thank you. Como tada.
Thank you so much, Kayce and Raphael. We have one more QR code for you briefly. So when Raphael reached out to us, we were so excited because this call for input could also be a way for students to engage with a UN report and also look at the impacts of nuclear testing on the Marshall Islands, which many of your presentations yesterday also highlighted. So I wanted to create a youth report collecting all of your voices in your school teams and individually, and put that into one report that we can all send to Raphael. So this QR code is a link to a Google form I created. So it has all of the questions that the call for input highlights, and you as a school team or as an individual, if you're one of the only ones in your school who might want to write something, can fill out this form, and I will collect it, all of your responses, and put them all into one draft report. I will maybe send this out, depending on how quickly everybody gets me responses. I put the date as November 15th to all send in your responses, so please follow that so that I can draft up something for all of us to look at, and then I will send it over. So I hope this will be a really amazing report with all of our voices collected. Now, we move on to our next presentation. Also, this will also be sent out through email after the